Okay, good morning. Welcome to R&D Unplugged number 12. We're very glad to have today Seth Frey all the way from California. And without further ado, over to you, Seth.
Wonderful. I'm so pleased. Thank you, everybody. So I'm here at LPI because of a shared interest. I mean, very much in building communities that decide how they want to run. And I have a personal interest in that, having lived in a lot of communities and built several communities that run how they want to run. That combined with my training as a quantitative computational behavioral scientist has led to a research interest in communities that run how they say they want to run. I have other interests too. I'm interested generally in the commons as a theoretical framework for this, because it just covers everything. It covers farmers in Nepal and lobstermen in Maine and classrooms and online communities. I think I really focus most of my work on the internet's communities because the internet's communities are toy models, essentially, of real world communities. They have the same intentions. You're building something of value. People can free ride off of that value without contributing. You have finite resources. People can extract those resources in an unsustainable way. And if you can solve it online, and because people can solve it online, we know that we have all the levers necessary to have a reliable toy model, a reliable model system. If all the ingredients are there, then we have the basic elements to study fundamental questions that are of relevance outside. And a lot of my work is asking questions in a way to make sure that they'll generalize to other kinds of communities. Though the internet's worth studying itself because of how much our lives are there, because how many of our communities are there. I'm also interested just personally in intentional community for social transformation, and this gives me a lot of lived experience solving these types of problems. I have side interests as well. There's governance across types of conscious experience, which I think is relevant for studying children. Child self-governance, they have different consciousness, especially as they get younger and younger. But also, the elderly as well. I'd love to visit a self-governing home for the elderly and understand how governance changes as people experience cognitive decline. I think governance across the ages is our closest for this picture of governance across life forms. So this is the framework of the commons. So really, for me, it comes out of the work of Eleanor Ostrode, who studies, forest across the world. She studied irrigation across the world. She studied all kinds of commons across the world. And because she built a framework for studying completely irreconcilable natural resource systems, to plug online communities in there, online communities are not so more different than forests and fisheries are from each other in a way. And so we're able to frame the problem generally and study it in general. And this again contributes to online communities being important model systems. Another thing that contributes to online communities being important model systems is comparison. If you're a cell biologist, you study lots of cells. If you're a psychologist, you study lots of individuals. And yet when we study schools or classrooms, we're often studying just one. We have a deep case study, which is great, but I think we're so often overrepresented on case studies because they're what's most easily available. There are a lot of online communities, and with 10 lines of code, I can study a lot of online communities. I can collect data on hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of communities and run regressions to come up with general insights into their structure and how they typically run. traditionally societal scale research, research with the community or the social system as the basic unit of analysis, rather than individuals as the unit of analysis, is constrained by money, time, and staff. But here's a Minecraft server, the children's game Minecraft, and you can see as this video goes that the trees go down and the buildings go up. This is a tragedy of the commons online, and it's solved by children. And so by scraping, in this case, 300,000 Minecraft servers for how they're running, how they're working, and what governance systems they install, we can get insight, evidence that children can solve the tragedy of the commons together. And we can test theories for how one should do it, how one should do it, and how much those line up together. In everyday life, voting, cooperatives, town halls, community groups are examples of us putting into practice the principles of democracy that allow us to scale up, solve the global challenges which require the same thing. Overfishing, global warming, deforestation, antibiotic resistance, and so on. Every major problem facing humanity is a tragedy of the commons. And so if we can't solve our kitchen sink, we don't have hope for solving global problems. Fortunately, the online community also gives us models for many of these problems. And so if we can solve them online or understand how they're solved online, we have the basic elements to solve them in the real world and in our lives. So I solve them by comparing the Wikipedias or the Reddits. There's 300 language editions of Wikipedia. There's about 100,000. Well, there's about 2 million Reddit discussion communities, about 100,000 of which have written rules that I can ingest, computationally represent, and test theories about. The open source community has umbrella organizations like the Apache Software Foundation, which we'll focus on today. That's about 300 open source software community running software that runs the internet. And they all follow a common set of rules. If we study them, we can compare how they actually work. I shared Minecraft. We might have a chance to go more into that. It has a wonderful ecosystem of software plugins that implement modules of self-governance so that a child can decide how they want to solve the problem. Do they want to install communication mechanisms, enforcement mechanisms, top-down monitoring mechanisms, peer monitoring mechanisms? Do they want to use private property rights or common property regimes to solve their problems? Do they want to install the idea of social hierarchy? If there's a problem, do they want to prevent it by reducing the number of actions you can perform? There won't be any fires, which are not just destroying buildings, they also introduce lag, which is a physical common pool resource, network bandwidth, RAM, and CPU. But if you turn off the idea of fire, turn off the idea of TNT, there won't be. So you can prevent bad behavior or you can remediate bad behavior by just rolling back giant blocks of the world if they get destroyed. So there's this choice of how to solve your problems, and we can understand how children solve them. World of Warcraft is another community. The pirate World of Warcraft community is yet another. There's just a lot of options online, and by testing across them, we're able to get general insights online, which increases the likelihood of general insights offline. Online communities are great. There's a ton of data, not just at the community level. I have complete behavioral data of every individual, so you get to study emergence as you go from the brain to the individual to the community, and the community to the community of communities, communities to the platform, and then platform across platforms to the internet. Understanding transitions and emergence across these scales gives us, again, an increasingly rich model of self-governance and the emergence of governance complexity. So many units, real people, in the sense that this isn't a laboratory experiment. These are people who could choose to spend their time anywhere, and they choose to spend it online, building meaning with other people. It's simple enough, it's general enough. There's often high motivation and clear goals, which helps me use the rational actor framework from behavioral economics, which I do rely on. It's not as bad as it sounds. It just means that when people, here's all the rationality means for how I use it. It means that if you know someone's goal and you know that they're motivated to achieve it, you can assume that their behavior is towards that goal. Which doesn't sound like a lot because it's not a lot. But when you're wandering the streets, your traces, your GPS or your cell phone, they're not interpretable unless I know what you want. But once I know what you want, then I can interpret that your action is towards that. It's very simple. It's a simple methodological thing that makes observational research interpretable by theory. And you offer a selection, which means you can bring evolutionary insights to communities. You can say that because communities changed over time, they got better over time. When you have selection of performance, you can assume that. The projects cover a lot of domains. I'm going to focus on two, focus mainly, possibly the whole time we'll spend on, do we run how we say we run? Which we can dive into as soon as I get into some of my communities. I'm active in the Meta-Governance Project, which is interested in online communities as laboratories for governance experimentation. I'm active in the IGRI community, which is interested in computational policy analysis. This is turning text into computational representations of institutions, because so many of our governance systems, including all the signs above the sink telling you to wash your dishes, are in language, tools for turning language into representations of institutions are important. And I spend a lot of my time developing and building them. And my students do as well, as you'll see. This is not my book, this is my colleague's book out of MetaGov. It's a great for capturing a lot of what we've been up to, us governance nerds in the online space. So I'm going to start with Do We Run How We Say We Run, a project by my student Mahasweta Chakraborty, who's a fifth year looking for postdocs focused on AI policy right now. And AI text analysis. So open source is worthwhile to study in its own right. It matters. It runs our internet. It runs our lives. It depends on behavior. It has a structure. We have theory about that structure. And we don't know if that theory is good because we normally do case studies. So we can't get general insights. Does behavior in an or reflective structure, and this is a good thing. What I mean is, we have the way LPI, this community works, and we have how it says it works. We have its rules. And how similar are those? Every branch of social science has language for talking about the relationship between how we run and how we say we run. In law, there's de jure versus de facto. In sociology, there's rules and form, rules and use. There's formal versus informal, there's rules versus norms. There's a lot of ways of saying the same thing, which is questioning whether they're the same and observing maybe they're not the same. But systematic study of the actual difference, rigorous identification that there is a difference is a research challenge that people have struggled to meet. So we're not able to say more than we don't run how we say we run. We don't know how or why or in what way. And we want to solve this. And it turns out that the open source community is ideal for solving it. The open source community has a norm of openness. What that means is their code is open and they're committed to open code. And so that openness, that norm of openness translates into other parts of their lives, particularly communications. So there's a rule in the Apache Software Foundation. Let's see, I have to get into that. The Apache, there's a piece of software called the Apache Server. It was one of the first examples of open source software that outcompeted privately developed software from Microsoft. And it started, it really kicked off the open source movement. It eventually grew into the Apache Software Foundation, which is an umbrella organization, a nonprofit that hosts open source projects, basically providing administrative support so that coders can code instead of running an organization. And it puts certain principles into practice. One of those is open communication, which says that all project relevant discourse must be on public mailing lists. Because all collaboration is happening online, what that means for us is that all project relevant discourse is available. And so we can see how we say we run. We also, of course, have all the rules, which are public and open because it's a public organization committed to openness. So we have how we say we run. We have how we say we run, we have how we actually run, and we can do a bunch of data science to compare those and say how they're the same and how they're different. If I can get to the next slide. Yeah. Here are some of the projects. Here's some of our papers on this project. Here are their commitments of the Apache Software Foundation. Earned authority, community of peers, open communications. That's what we're leveraging methodologically. Consensus decision-making and responsible oversight. It's actually a great set of principles. And the opportunity to study how such an open, interesting, and civilized organization runs, rather than applying organization theory, institutional theory to traditional hierarchically run organizations, is itself just a great opportunity. I've covered most of this. Our research questions narrowly will be, what is the relationship of rules informed to rules in use? Does the process of formalization match what people say they do? How much do people internalize formal regulations, and under which conditions are people's written communications reflecting formal rules? And does matching how you run and how you say you run affect performance? Are organizations better when they run how they say they run, or are they worse when they run how they say they run? We can answer all this. The policies, all the 300 projects follow the same policies, or all 208 in our analysis follow the same 250 sentences of policy. Those 208 projects have written about 2 million sentences from 700,000 emails. We can also extract the properties of the code itself, get into code quality measures, which again helps us see if it's good to follow the rules, because we can say if the projects themselves are good and under what conditions. How long they've been at it, some membership issues. We have all the members, we have all their emails, we can match emails to people and people to leadership positions. It's a really rich environment for asking a lot of key questions. Here's an example of a rule, an example of a statement from email. So one person is explaining the rules to another person. Different ASF projects have different policies. The important part is that we should have a common understanding about our commit policy. This is the policy of contributing code to the public databases. For example, there might, for example, be a branch for the next release where RTC, review and commit, is applied. That's useful when preparing a release for maintenance releases. We still actively maintain blah, 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 blah. There's other examples where we commit, then review is standard. Most ASF projects have the whole repo on commit, then review. What does that mean? You can either push the code to the world and then have someone who understands the code read it and make sure it's good. And if it is, they accept it. If not, they give it back. Or you can have a responsible person read the code before committing. It sounds minor, but these are just, it's minor enough that you see organizations practice both, which is great. But you want everyone on the same board about what type of organization you are. So you make a rule. The rule in this case isn't saying you have to do it this way. It's not saying this is better. It's just saying this is how we do it. It's communicating a standard for facilitating coordination, which is a common role of rules. In this country, we all drive on the right side of the road. It doesn't matter which side of the road we drive on. Let's just agree. Or else, the cost of not agreeing is very high. This is why so many rules exist, which is minor. It's less about enforcement. It's less about rigor. It's less about control. It's more about coordination. So here's what we do. we take the original policy or the original sentence, we translate it into a formal form, we strip away a lot of the complexity so that we have a computational, simple representation of all the policy sentences and all the email sentences. And once they're stripped down, well organized, well ordered, we can start to say if they're similar or far in meaning in what they talk about. And then once we can compare them, we can, of course, say if they're the same. We do a bunch of linguistics to build that simple representation. We had a big pipeline, so we do a bunch of mining to get the 700,000 emails. We do a bunch of translating to strip those emails down to their core meaning. We do a bunch of embedding to put them into a giant pool of sentences. And we put the rules in the same pool of sentences. And so we can kind of see what people talk about and what's governed and how on top of each other they are. We do topic analysis to turn that giant pool of things into clusters that vaguely mean something. And then we can say, well, all these rules about the same thing are kind of here. And so all the sentences that are kind of here too, they must be about that topic. And so they must be about the same thing. We do all that. And then we do a bunch of visualization, regression, similarity stuff to say what's what and where's where. And this allows us to start asking questions. Here are the first questions. What topics are governed? How do we assign all the 250 sentences of policy to some number of topics? How many topics are there? How is governance effort distributed across governance topics? Our text is small, but the most rules that I think is blue line are about the Podling Project Management Committee. A Podling is a project in the ASF. Most governance effort is put into the structure of governing a single open source project in the organization. Below that, we have the Apache Foundation contributor license. The second amount of policy goes into the question of licensing. Under what license should software be released? This is a fundamental contribution of the Apache Software Foundation, is developing new licenses that make it possible for open source code to exist. What should the relationship with business be? Should businesses be able to profit off of open code without giving anything back? According to the Apache Software Foundation, the answer actually is yes, which is an important distinction that led to the GPL, which says, no, you can't. Any code you write that uses open source code must be open source. And this leads to religious distinctions that dictate the course of open source software for decades. The next amount of rules go into how email communications should occur, basically saying they should be open and you shouldn't talk about the project on sources that are not open. We have release management, how to release software to the public from janky code that's not publicly, that's not nicely packaged into something for other humans to use. We have rules about voting, reporting, committing, the process of joining the incubator, the process of leaving the incubator, how to manage community, how to interact with developers, how to run meetings, set out timelines, set up elections, what software to use, and so on and so on. You can see there's increasingly fewer rules about an increasing number of topics, but our main 10 are all about running a project together. So here's the question. You're seeing the blue lines get thinner as we get to the bottom. Next, I'm going to show you this exact same distribution across topics, but not from the rules, from the email communications. And so the question is, it'll be a bunch of orange lines. Will those orange lines also start off long and get shorter and shorter as we reach the bottom? That means that we run how we say we run a bit. It means that the effort we put into our email communications across topics matches the effort that we put into formalizing those processes. Or do you think that the orange lines will start off thin and get thicker? This means that we put less conversational effort into things with a lot of rules. Why might that be? Yeah,
Because it's very clear, something we don't have to discuss about it.
that's right. We have a lot of rules about murder, and that means we don't have to talk about murder all the time. Yeah. So that could happen. Or they could be uncorrelated. They could just have nothing to do with each other. How many of you know the bylaws of LPI? So maybe, maybe they're just orthogonal, right? Maybe they're about different things in a way. Does someone want to? So if you point over there, if you think that the lines will get it'll have the same structure. It'll get thick and then thinner. Right? That we devote effort to things in proportion to how much they're governed. And then you can point over here if you think it's the opposite, that issues are settled, and so we don't have to talk about it as much. I need a little more. Wow. You can just point out. Okay, most people think it'll be the opposite. Turns out it is. What do you think? It's actually uncorrelated. A little bit. Most people talk about patches and issues, which means they're doing the work, they're programming. Oh, here's your patch, I'm going to fix your patch and change your patch, and I submitted a new thing, and blah, 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 I reviewed it, and, or I found this bug, and I wrote a patch, and you're going to review it, and patch this, patch that, patch that. They talk a lot about patches, they're talking a lot about code, doing the work of code. They talk a lot about release management. Hey, we have this deadline coming up. We need version 2.0 to come out. And is it ready? And we need all these patches reviewed in order to release the release. So they're talking about the work. They're talking about the work. And they're all professionals. So they don't have to formalize the work. And we're not saying every project has to run this way. 250 sentences of policy. There's not a lot of sentences. They're trying to be pretty hands-off. They're dictating high level how the umbrella should be structured. They're not very precisely, very narrowly, very bossily telling every project how to run. What else do we have discussed a lot? We have the incubator itself, because I didn't actually mention this. To join the umbrella organization and benefit from all the administrative support, you have to be onboarded. You actually have to run the Apache way. You have to change how you run from however you started to run to running in a way that's consistent with the organization and its values. And so there's a lot of talk about, oh, we have to check these boxes to join the organization. How far are we from that? That's what they talk about. Wonderful. Okay, so what have we found? Are more heavily governed topics discussed more or less? No. It's a sort of no. All right, here's our next one. Separate from how much we talk about things, there's a question of how much we internalize the rules. And the way we measure this is when you talk about a governed topic in email, are you using the same words? There's special terminology introduced in the rules. There's certain framings of policy issues discussed in the rules. Do people use those framings? Do they use that vocabulary, or do they talk in their own way or more informally about these issues? And how much is that a function of the amount of governance effort put into a topic? So you might say, pointing that way, that that if more effort is put into formalizing a process, it's more likely that people will talk about it that way. Or you might say that if more effort is put into formalizing a process, people are less likely to talk about it that way. Or you might say there's no relationship. No, this is a little bit more. No. Most people are pointing this way. That if more efforts put into formalizing a process, people are more likely to behave consistently with that. Do we want to make an argument for either? Does someone want to argue why they should be correlated or uncorrelated? What's your hunch, Eric, for correlate? Oh.
Depends on the time frame. Maybe initially they discuss it, and as it goes on, they change their minds or identify problems in the rule that was created, and then people shift.
Yeah, we didn't find the effective time. which is going to be the order of a year, sometimes 2 years, is how long projects. These are good projects in incubation, actually. So if we're going to find that a time effect anywhere, it'll be in this group of projects because they're onboarding. But we didn't find it. Yeah. So it depends is wrong, actually. There's a right answer. Does someone want to make an argument for this wall or for that wall?
I would say I think it's participatory. If it's bottom up, the creation of group, and to embark, to use it. If it's top down, people may not agree, and it's just,
They didn't pick these rules, but they did choose together to join this organization, and they do run by consensus. So you pointed this way? Okay, great. Which is consistent with what you're saying.
I'm wondering, so all these people or most of these people are developers, so they have already a common language,
Yes.
independently of Apache.
Yes.
So they have probably internalized a lot of the language before joining Apache.
That's right. Then why did you point over there for the other question?
Oh,
Great. Good. All right, so yeah, it's not straightforward. The answer is, well, I don't know. Can you kind of see this going down? So this is an internalization that does in fact go down when the amount of formalization goes down. The more formalized something is, the more people internalize it, as many of you get. And then we have a question: is any of this good? Does it affect project outcomes to be more compliant with the rules?
In terms of,
The way we tested it is there's topics with a lot of rules. There's topics with fewer rules. If I put most effort into complying with the most governed rules, am I more likely to graduate into Apache Software Foundation? Am I more likely to finish incubation and become an official project? The answer ends up being there are certainly governed topics that the more I internalize them and the more I talk about them, the more likely I am to succeed. But those topics are not the most heavily governed topics, turns out. So out of 40 topics, there's about 5 that it really matters that I'm doing the work to internalize. And other topics, it doesn't matter so much. So that was our regression finding. There are correlates of policy compliance with project success, which you can't say in a lot of policy analysis, because a lot of policies in the real world at national scale take 10 years to see any effect. And guess what? A lot happens in 10 years. So you can never really directly attach a policy outcome to a policy because a policy outcome is also the outcome of a million social processes. But in using online communities as model systems for governance, we're able to say pretty straightforwardly, it just happened over a year, and we saw every single email, every single communication that happened during that year. We're able to say this policy had this effect, which I'm really excited about. And this is why I do this online stuff. Now we have, does that mean I'm 8 minutes over?
No, you still have time.
How much time?
As much as you need, maybe 10 minutes.
Don't say, what do you say? What's your answer?
24 minutes.
5-4.
Every
7.5.
Great. All right, so we've done a bunch of other stuff. I'll get into some high-level things about other things I've studied. We did this great big Minecraft project. Kids can install plugins that implement different kinds of governance. And so we're able to make conclusions about that. They build amazing stuff. We got a giant data set of 10 million players. Most governance effort is put into, if you see the strongest green, that means that the most common type of plugin to be installed between communication plugins, information broadcast plugins, market exchange plugins, or administrator plugins that empower the boss. Most governance effort is put by kids into making the boss more stronger, the person in charge of the server. And out of all the problems you can try to solve between virtual resources, physical resources, RAM, CPU, and bandwidth, or bad behavior, if you squint and see more blue under behavior, it means that most governance effort is put into solving the problem of bad behavior. If you see arrows, those are significant effects. There's more, you put more effort into empowering the administrator, the bigger you get. You put more effort into managing bad behavior, the bigger you get. But the only thing that would correlate with success, that's giving an up arrow, is effort in managing physical resources, RAM, CPU, bandwidth. There's also evidence for that institutional diversity is good. You're more likely to succeed the more different kinds of problems you're solving in more different kinds of ways. This is called institutional diversity. And it's an argument against ideology, essentially, that we shouldn't be purists about markets for everything, democracy for everything. We should use the right type of governance for the job. We did some work trying to ask the question. It turns out that people who are similar like servers that are governed in similar ways. And we asked the question, what causes what? Do servers that have similar governance attract similar types of people? Or do people who go to similar servers cause them to be governed in similar ways? Those are opposite directions of causation. We find some evidence for both. You know, it's a feedback process, but one's much stronger than the others. It turns out that being governed in a similar way drives people who are similar to those servers. That's one type of result we got. We did the Wikipedia work across 300 language editions, showing that 300 organizations, driven by people from 300 languages, from 300 cultures, and 300 histories, trying to achieve one mission, a common mission of Wikipedia, to provide an open encyclopedia in their language. They could follow 300 development processes, or they could follow one. Or they could follow, 2, 5, or whatever. So we were interested in the question of how many policy development paths are there for 300 very different communities achieving the same goal. Any questions? Any guesses? Who guesses 5? Who guesses, or a bunch? Who guesses 1? A bunch. 1. Oh, yeah. One's kind of conspicuous. Why would he say 1? It turns out there's one. There's noise. There's noise. It's not identical, but yeah, there's pretty much one path that all these follow. Probably because they're in discussion with each other. They're all learning from English, from French, from German, from Spanish, from the biggest ones. So they more or less solve the same problems in the same order. They all have vandalism policies, but you don't get a vandalism policy until later. We're able to show that most rules that people write are about regulating behavior across platforms, rather than developing complex institutional structures. The most rules that people write are more about suggesting good behavior than demanding it. Yeah, and in other work, we have fun stuff about experiments and design and so on. But yeah, the main takeaway is online communities are valuable laboratories for studying policy processes, the emergence of self-governance, the effectiveness of random communities at responsible self-governance, and only by getting really big data sets on lots and lots of communities, by getting data that allows you to bridge individual behavior to governance and other social outcomes, can we test fundamental policies about in the science of self-governance, the science of community, and the science of, in my opinion, democracy. Thank you.
Questions in the room? Eric?
Do you have any idea how much compliance to the rules is related to freedom to change the rules. Like in some models, it's more autocratic. So others, it's really democratic.
Yeah. First, we don't have compliance. We have internalization, and we have the amount you talk about it. But you might be talking about it a lot because you disagree with it, or you might be talking a lot and in a way that's suggesting behavior that's non-compliant. So, but regardless, like we have the match, we have the internalization, and you're asking me how much is that connected to the ability to change those 250 rules? So first I'll make a distinction. In addition to the 250 rules, every project is allowed to have its own rules. They tend not to write them down, and they don't write them down in a standard way. So we actually didn't have every project's own rules, which would be you'd expect in a multi-level system. So a little bit what you're asking is, how much do individual projects get involved in the umbrella? It turns out the umbrella is stable enough. Its rules don't change very fast. They do change. We have some rule changes in the 250, but that time scale is over the decades of data we have, rather than the 1 to 2 years that projects spend in incubation. So ends up not being the kind of question that we can ask in a tremendously meaningful or deep way. And this is the problem with observational work, with this kind of large-scale comparative work, is it often picks what question you're going to ask. I don't get to pick my research question if I pick my data set. So non-answer. But let's see, what are our options? I would guess unrelated. There are people who get really involved after the incubation process in mentoring other projects. And we have data and research on mentorship, which is actually great. Maybe you'll find it interesting because it's a peer education type of thing. And those people certainly, some of those mentors rise up to get involved in policy change processes. But I'd say for the most part, Apache's been stable. They really got their formula with one project, the Apache server, and they pasted that onto others, and of course they're going to change and evolve. But that's going to be less a function of the needs or preferences of new members who know what they're getting into, or they wouldn't put all the work into it. And a little more a function of probably just growth. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for the speech. I have two questions. The first is very practical. I'm not sure to, I haven't understand very well how you measure the internalization.
Once again?
How do you measure the internalization?
Internalization, right. What we did was we used language embeddings. We used BERT specifically to associate every sentence with a point in 780 dimensional space. And then we put every rule in 780 dimensional space. And if those dots are close to each other, we say that they're semantically related. Those dots also depend a lot specifically on the vocabulary you're using. And that's why it ends up being a good measure of internalization. If the dots are close, then you've internalized it. If the dots are far, you have not internalized it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And my second question is about the flexibility of the communities, because I know on most of the work on the common goods and the communities, like for instance, on the forest, on the agriculture, we have community where the people cannot really live or come, so they have to tackle the problem of the common good. But you say about Minecraft, for instance, that the people chose the server depending on the route. So I assume that online, depend maybe on Apache, it's more complicated, but online, you have this difference that is people can come and go depending on the route. Or do you think that changed the theoretical framework around the common?
Well, it certainly opens up. So we talked about often there's a dichotomy between exit and voice. Do you want to exert influence on an organization by speaking up and saying it should run a different way? Or do you want to exert influence by voting with your feet, by leading? Which you can say creates market pressure on the people who are in servers to act as if they're benevolent. So in a way, the answer ends up being that the ability to exit, especially Minecraft, where exit is cheap, creates more mechanisms. It reduces the reliance on voice and allows you just more levers. It gives every user more levers. You can say it that way. You could say that exit is so much easier than voice that it dominates, and people do that instead. I think that's true. There's only so many hours in the day. There's hundreds of thousands of servers. So the intention to spend a lot of time on one server is a very strong signal, I think. A very strong endorsement. We look mostly at servers that are already popular. One thing that I think for sure, I think I'm not exactly answering your question. I'm more just giving you an elaborate non-answer that's very about the context of the domain. One thing we can say, remember, there's all this focus on making the administrator stronger. That's the main approach to governance in this environment. And that sounds bad. It sounds like kids want dictators if they're selecting into it. But because of this exit context, one thing you can say is exit creates market competition among tyrants. And if there's a market for tyrants, there's market incentives for every leader to act as if they're benevolent. Even if they remain in charge. And I think this isn't the worst idea. Normally, I find it really ugly, which is to say, I don't love this idea. I don't think this is the way to solve the world's problems. But I think it works in this environment, at least. Yeah. You want to ask your question again? We can try another stab at answering it. That's good. Satisfactory?
Yeah. Just maybe two questions which are related. In one of the slides, you had a sentence which intrigued me, which was how behaviors in organizations reflect structure. And I was wondering if you can elaborate more which type of behaviors and how do you see the pattern of like the path dependencies and structures. And maybe a related question to that, like we see in online communities, different statuses and different roles that actually change over time.
Yeah.
And based on these roles, the activities of different individuals will be different as well. So how can you tie it to structure and how do you do that? Yeah.
Well, so this relationship of behavior and structure, I wrote that just as another way of asking the main question: do we run how we say we run? And so I'd say the project itself is one way of approaching that question between behavior and structure, which is people behave, and we're using speech acts theory to say that speech, text, email is behavior. And it says, if you accept that, then the extent to which email sentences match policy sentences is a way of posing the question of the relationship of behavior and structure. You buy that? Okay, great. And so this isn't the end of the behavior structure debate. I would say do we run how we say we run? The policy compliance question is a facet of behavior and structure that we're able to dig into in this one domain because of its peculiarities. The other question was about moving roles and do people change the behavior? We know the roles that people have. We know if someone's just a user, if they're a code contributor, if they're a leader of the project, which is to say they're a member of the Podling Project Management Committee. We know if they're a mentor to a project, they sign a list. And we scrape the list as well, and we associate it with their email and their username. We know if they're a member of the Apache project committees, and we can see the changes over the 2 decades of data that we have. We have not asked any research questions about the behavior as a single person changes roles. If you have deep questions that get into fundamental processes of organizations and institutions, I'm all ears. That sounds like a great thing to do.
Carriers in the online community is something that actually
Great. So what I say is often I'm picking my questions not just off what's interesting, but what's interesting that only I can ask. And the big opportunity here for me is the question not to ask questions about people, but the power to ask questions about projects. Because it's easy to ask questions about people, there's lots of data about people. When people say that the Twitter was n equals 500 million, that's the unit of analysis of the person. When I look at Twitter, it's n equals 1, because there's only one Twitter. And so most of our questions about projects, there's certainly an opportunity to also ask questions about the thousands of people who engage. The good stuff I know about career trajectories is a similar project by, I forget his name, I'll have to, Srinathon, I think. He had a great question about how much do you internalize the norms, how that influences your trajectory through an organization, showing that people who use the same words and emails as their bosses are more likely to stay in the organization and get promoted. People who use really different words than their bosses are more likely to leave the organization. It's a great result. Yeah. But it was N of 1 as far as I'm concerned, because it was about these processes in one organization. And then
I wonder about the selection bias of who goes to online communities or to play this game, etc. And how does it intrinsic motivation of these people to play the game? And also of the policy aspect, and how that can translate to other containers like
that's right.
the world city.
Yeah, so this is the generalization question. Are online people real people? Are the things we learn about people online generalizable to other populations? This is, the big question, and the answer, of course, is it depends. A lot of my work, I don't want to be an internetologist. I don't want to be a Twitterologist. I want to be a peopleologist, and so I ask questions I try to ask questions that generalize. How do you ask a question that generalizes? What's the sign of a question that's going to generalize? What I do is I find something in the real world that's rare, like government success. And then I make an argument that however rare it is in the real world, it's even more rare online. That's the advantage of the Minecraft project, who we're all bad at collective action. Let's assume that children are even worse. Let's assume that male adolescents are worst of all. If we accept that assumption, then their successes at self-governance are more likely to tell everybody about successful self-governance. So find something rare that's even rare. Find something unlikely that's even more unlikely online. Find something, and if it exists, then you found a general thing. Find something common that's even more find something that should be common, that should be even more common online. And if you don't find it online under certain circumstances, then you have the general claim. Do we have it for this domain? No. I'd say for the Apache project, we have less of a generalizable argument than for the Minecraft stuff, for example. Yeah. But again, here's the other argument for generalization. I kind of threw it in the beginning, where this is what theoretical frameworks are for. Theoretical frameworks say, there's a lot of detail in every system. Here's what matters. And if you can match what matters, then you fit framework. And if you fit framework, then you fit theory, and if you general theory. And if you fit general theory, then you have general claims. So we're using the framework of the commons. The framework of the commons says, well, it doesn't matter if you're fishing or cutting trees down or irrigating crops or sending sheep out to pasture. What matters is you're a motivated individual. You need to succeed at responsible management of common pool resources. The resources that are finite and not privately ownable. And if you're a rational agent who's motivated to sustainably manage finite non-ownable resources, then you fit theory. And if you're one of those and you accomplish that in a certain way, then that's a theory claim. It's a human's claim. It's not an internet claim. So the use of theory, the use of Ostrom theory is our other, ultimately weaker theory for generalizability. So I say weaker, but it's strong enough for all of social science. So it's a different bar. Monica?
Yeah, I have two questions. I don't know if I have the time for the two, but let's start with the first, which is related to what you just said, but I want to push it further. So it's about generalization. So how do you prove then that something that you have found for such and such communities is generalizable?
Yeah.
What allows you to say that if you observe that there, then there are chances, even the assumption that some governance success would be less common online than in the outside
Yeah.
world, what justifies, what allows you to have this assumption?
Yeah, so that's not a project for me. That's not a question for me. It's a question for social science. So, there's the objective bar for answering that question. Then there's the social science bar for answering that question. Ultimately, humans are less controllable than rocks and plants and atoms and all the things we do, kind of popper level falsification of science on. And therefore, the amount that science can squeeze out of social systems is less than the amount it can squeeze out of the things we have the power to destroy, basically. And so I'd say by the social science bar, where it's where you want to be, it's state of the art. But by any kind of this is impossible, this is demonstrably impossible, this is demonstrably universal kind of bar, we can't do that. So that again is a shortcoming of science as applied to humans in general. It's less a shortcoming of this project. So.
Yeah,
And shortcoming of the methods. So there's no perfect method for studying humans. So I mix methods because every method is strengths. You want a causal claim, you want to be able to say A made B happen. Don't use observational data like I did, where we did some clever stuff to make that causation argument. But the gold standard of causation is the lab experiment. What's the problem with the lab experiment? Well, you can only study smaller groups, A, and you're creating artificial environments, B. That's the power of observational data, is it's real people, but you lose causation. And then there's, so I like to do stronger science by mixing methods. So I do lab stuff, I do observational stuff, I do formal theory stuff, where we do just straight kind of, survey interview stuff. And only by writing multiple papers, using multiple methods about the same question, can a social scientist start to make rigorous claims about how people are. And because everything I showed you is just observational data, it's just a career instead of a paper project to make the kind of causal claims or rigorous claims or universal claims that we're all after. You had another question.
Yes.
Sure.
That's more an interested question about ethics and the data, how you collect data, and do you have data about individuals? Because at some point you said that you could trace to the individuals. How does it work? What are the ethical rules for that in the US right now? How do you get the big data that you work with from is individual data, personal data involved in any sense, and how do you?
So we use there's a lot of exemption criteria in the IRB. Is it minimally invasive? Is it this or that? We use is it public? If the data is already public, then it's IRB exempt. So people are already publicly publishing their email addresses and their names when they contribute to these things. If they didn't want that, they would use a fake name and use an alias, which some people do. And so we get out of formal legal ethical review by studying public data. Then there's a question, okay, but formal legal ethicalness is different than actual ethicalness. You have more and more of a conversation, especially in information science and computer science. What do we think is ethical? And so there is more work actually about conducting ethical IRB style review on research that uses public data to make sure that above and beyond the technical bar, is it actually ethical? Because you can do all that work, but then you're for killer robots, and so there's the conversations in these communities. Well, in addition to satisfying the bar, are you also building killer robots? And I'm not really after that, so that's a different thing. But That's the end. I think in terms of how did he get away with it, it's all public data. Another exemption actually is corporate data. This is an awful thing, a very strange and awful thing about IRB. It says if a company is willing to do it, it must be right. If you're borrowing data that was collected by a company for business purposes and you're analyzing that, you're also IRB exempt, which I think is crazy.
Yes, this is very short. If one is interested to learn more about this, where they can do it.
I have lots of papers, and they're very long. I'll share. Yeah. I also have lots of talks, they're very short.
Okay, I think this is it. Thank you very much, Seth.